everybody. This is Jordan Rodriguez, and I'm so excited to share that we are trying out a new capsule series for NFL Daily called NFL Daily Power Players. As many of you know, I love football. One of my favorite things about the NFL is learning about how teams are built, how decision makers from coaches to executives to scouts to players think, and the process itself of the sport. How football people do football is the coolest thing ever. So in these episodes of NFL Daily Power Players, we're going to talk to football people and learn from them and pull back the curtain of the sport for you just a little further. We'll sprinkle these into your feed from time to time, a little surprise extra treat for our listeners. Be sure to check out a fantastic first episode with Carolina Panthers Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Brant Tillis. And today, I am so thrilled to be speaking with Los Angeles Chargers Assistant GM, Chad Alexander. Chad has helped build NFL teams for 27 years, with 2 decades in Baltimore in various roles in that storied front office, and 5 years with the New York Jets. Now, Chad is GM Joe Hortiz's right-hand man as the Chargers establish themselves as one of the best teams in the AFC. The playoff-hunting Chargers have obviously had more than their fair share of injuries all season, but as Chad likes to say, there are no style points in this league, and especially the way that these Chargers are built, and they keep finding ways to win games, even unconventionally. And even before the injuries started rocking their offensive line, especially, you could see the clear vision to be bigger, more physical, tougher than their opponents. I refer to them often as a modern throwback because they blend progressive ideas with vintage football qualities. We're going to talk to Chad today about helping to build that ethos within the team, which of course starts with the players, but is also an important responsibility for the front office and coaching staff too. I think you guys are going to love this. Let's get right into it. Hi, Chad. Thrilled to have you here today on NFL Daily's Power Players. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. I know. I feel like we should have just had you come right up the street from El Segundo and come into the studio here. I'm staring right across the street at your home stadium.
I know. That's crazy. I love LA. It's been cool since being here for a couple of years, and I never lived here before, but obviously visited it quite a few times. And it's a great area. It's a lot of fun.
I know. Warm winters, man. You can never go back.
Can never go back. Can never go back. I mean, I'm not used to this for sure.
Exactly. You know, I want to get right into it and into this idea. It's so fun watching what you guys have built with the Chargers over the last couple of seasons, because when you talk about team identity, sometimes it's hard to describe. You know it when you see it, and you know it when you feel it. And I would say that what you guys have built over there has been the epitome of establishing a tone, establishing a culture. And I sort of describe your team, and we've talked about this, as a little bit of like a modern throwback, right? Like you sort of pivoted a little bit when the rest of NFL's defenses got a little bit smaller. You guys decided to load up and be bigger, stronger, tougher than everybody, and to be really multiple schematically in the ways that you also did that. So take me back to the installation of this process, what you wanted your identity to be, and what you started doing, the little pieces you had to put in place to start trying to figure out how to get the guys in the building that would epitomize that.
Yeah, I think we always knew that we wanted our identity to be a team that was extremely tough, extremely physical, and we wanted our identity to really kind of emulate the identity of our head coach. You know, Jim is every program he's been associated with has been one that has been recognized as being extremely tough, violent, players that are, gritty, players that are versatile, like you talked about, and guys that just, have this unselfishness about them. And it's really a next man up mentality. And, we wanted to enforce our will on opponents. And I think you kind of see that, the last couple of weeks have been really inspiring for everybody in the organization. We've won 6 of our last 7, but the last 2 games have really been kind of fistfights with the 2 Super Bowl teams from a year ago. And I feel like we try to enforce our identity. We try to kind of make teams play our style of football. And it's not necessarily conventional in today's football, but at the same time, we're not really interested in style points, and we're just really trying to build a book And I feel like we're trying to establish that.
Well, you see it because even with, injuries happening and there's this sort of resilience, I think that comes through and certainly has this season, including from the quarterback who I think when Justin Herbert and especially kind of being in LA and the last, before Jim came in and before you guys installed your staff and the rest of this roster, some of a reputation, he of being a finesse thrower, right? But you're seeing him put his foot in the ground. You're seeing him lower his
Yeah.
shoulder. What we talked about a lot on this show was we're like, Justin Herbert's out of the house, right? Because he's
Right.
pointing the first down marker and he's letting some of that personality show. So with him, how have you seen him grow and start to really be the face of this more physical brand of football that you guys are playing?
Yeah, and we never when we got here, we never associated him it really with anything that's based on being finesse. First of all, the guy's a specimen. I mean, he's huge physically, and really tough mentally, really tough physically, as he displayed by playing through several injuries and most recently the non-throwing hand. But Justin is extremely rugged, as a player, and yeah, he's a quarterback that has all the attributes. He's got the big arm, and he's a really athletic player and a good athlete and guy that can run. But at the same time, he's extremely tough, and it's inspirational to his teammates. For them to see a guy like that play through injuries, for them to see a guy like that who's really tough minded and just has a no nonsense approach to pretty much everything. I think it's really it's empowering for the rest of the team, and it's someone who people can look to and draw inspiration from. So, I mean, he's an outstanding leader, and he really kind of embodies everything that we're trying to accomplish here.
I love that response because you're also describing traits, right, that you really
Yeah.
very much needed to go and scout to bring more players into the building as you guys were establishing what you wanted this roster to be, whether it was veteran players in free agency or retaining some of the veteran players who are already on the roster or drafting guys who have these traits. You have worked for 25 years in the league at the highest levels of scouting and pro personnel. And I always find that scouts are scouts for life, right? Like you are
Mm.
always looking and assessing like how a part can fit to a whole, right? So when you're looking for traits, what is the process? Like, how do you prove beyond interviews and tape? How do you prove that a guy has these types of qualities that can sometimes be considered intangible?
We do a lot of background, a lot of research
Mm-hmm.
on every player that we discuss in terms of the draft specifically. We spend as much time on the player that's at the top of our draft board as we do a player that's really the last player on our list. And it's really all about sequencing guys and putting guys in an order. But we look for those core principles. I mean, we look for toughness, we look for resiliency, we look for grit, we look for guys who have overcome some sort of adversity, anything like
Mm-hmm.
that, just key tells that can let us know, hey, this is the type of player that we want to bring into this program because it's really not for everybody. It's for those, the rare players that are the toughest of the tough, the guys that are extremely durable, guys that are extremely tough minded. And those are the type of individuals that we look for. We talk to several different people when we go into these schools, and we like to compare notes and
Mm-hmm.
and bring everybody into the discussion. And it's all about really open and honest communication amongst the coaches, amongst the scouts, and we do draw on our experiences. So myself being in the league for as many years as I've been in it, there's not very many things that I haven't seen. So we kind of look at that and think about how's this guy going to project in our program, and also what's our development plan that we have
Mm-hmm.
for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that stuff is taken into consideration. Obviously we consider analytics and the player development part of it. But I think that for us, the best part about Jim and about Joe Ortiz, our general manager, is that they have a clear identity and a clear uh, set of standards that they have for each player that comes into the building. And so we know, based on the comments from the school, based on the comments from their coaches, if they transferred, comments from the last school, we know which type of players are going to survive and thrive in this building. And those are definitely the types of players that we try to draft, the types of players that we try to bring in through free agency, on the practice squad, and on any avenue in terms of building the roster.
I like what you said about you have such clarity from Joe and Jim, right? Can
Yeah.
you speak more about the importance of that type of clarity in communicating what an identity is for a team so that the entire building has no question? The scouts who are all over the country, the people who are drawing up the contracts, the players themselves. What is the importance of like knowing what you're about and being able to communicate it?
Yeah, I think it's vitally important. It's extremely critical that there's a lot of open and honest communication, particularly between the scouts and the coaches, right? Between the coaching staff and the personnel staff. And, Joe and Jim have done a great job of connecting those dots and, explaining to everybody, hey, this is our vision. This is our identity. These are the types of players we want and we need. And so when we come into the draft room and we discuss these players, there's open and honest communication. There's a lot of people that are giving their opinions, and you're encouraged to give your opinion. You're not encouraged to, your groupthink is not opinion, is not encouraged. Discussing things in silos is not encouraged. You're encouraged to just throw it all out on the table, and from there we just kind of come up with a list and an order of how we like these guys, and so there's a lot of detail that goes into every discussion and every player that we pick. So yeah, it's great to be a part of an organization where we have a clear-cut identity. We know what types of players we want to bring in, and we know what types of players that may fit elsewhere, but it probably wouldn't be a fit here. So I think that's important.
Yeah, so much of team building, one of the pieces of it that I think is so underrated is knowing what you also don't want, right? And that's a
Right.
life lesson too as you as you grow up. And so I'm curious, on NFL Daily, I warned you about this, Chad. On NFL Daily, we like to gamify things. We love game theory. We love testing out ideas and debating ideas with analysis behind them. Of course, we don't shout here. When you think
Right.
about like what you've been a part of and your life and your journey in coaching, I guess I would ask, like, if you were going to build a franchise from scratch, let's say it's on Mars, you have a climate control, oxygenated environment, right? You're starting totally from scratch. I want to know what the top three or the first three decisions you would make, starting with the very first one, the most important decision you think somebody building a franchise from scratch needs to make when they come into an organization.
Wow, that's a good question. I think when you're talking about building a franchise from scratch, I think you're not necessarily concerned about individual players, but you're really concerned about the culture. Culture certainly matters most. The quality of the people in the organization is always going to determine the success of the organization. And I think you want to start with alignment. You want to start with alignment with ownership. And, everybody wants to win, and everybody wants to do well, and everyone wants to compete for championships. But how do you want to win? What do you want your team to look like? What are your sacred yeses and nos? What are your non-negotiables? How are you going to build an environment to where people are comfortable having uncomfortable conversations? And I'm talking about every department and throughout football ops, and the analytics, the coaching, the player development, scouting, everybody. How are we all going to communicate? And how are we going to have these discussions? The best decisions really do come from discussion, and I think that's vitally important. I also think that from there, you really want to talk about the leadership structure. You want to decide who's going to come in and be the head coach. Who's going to be the leader of men, who's going to come in and preach his philosophy, and who's going to be aligned with our vision. I think that's extremely important. And it's also important to have someone who's a great communicator, who is a great leader, who's a great teacher, who's a great motivator, and someone who is extremely authentic. And I think we're very fortunate to have Jim here. He's extremely authentic, and
we've seen the clips. Yeah,
right.
We
Exactly.
love
And that's
it.
who he is.
Yeah.
That's exactly who he is. People ask me all the time, what's he like? And I'm like, all you got to do is watch one of his press
Yeah.
conferences, 'cause that's who he is. He's all ball all the time, and he's extremely authentic, and that resonates in the locker room. And I truly do believe that, the locker room is the most important room in the building. but I also believe that the locker room's the smartest room in the building, and they didn't get to where they are just by you just on athletic ability and football ability alone. They also got to where they are by being able to read people and being able to read the room and being able to adapt in certain situations. So you have to be extremely authentic, and your message has to resonate with the locker room. And it's I think that's really important. And it's not just the head coach; it's bringing in coaches who are able to develop talent. And I think we've done a great job with that here too. Our coaches have done an outstanding job of developing talent and getting the best results out of players that they can. And I think you see that the results are easy to see. I think the third thing is you want to talk about what type of players that you're going to bring in. How are you going to build the roster, and how are you going to build a developmental blueprint for the roster? Everyone has to be involved in these discussions, and it has to be. It doesn't matter who gets it right, as long as you go into a room and you decide what's the best decision for the organization. And each player has to have their own individual developmental plan. Whether it be for through the analytics, through player development, the strength and conditioning, the medical plan. Each player has to have their own plan. So I think that's really important, and we have to decide where you're going to spend the resources, where the resources are going to be allocated. You definitely want to have a draft centric approach. You want to build through the draft. The draft has to be the bloodline of your organization, and but you're always trying to upgrade the roster, always trying to churn the bottom of the roster, always trying to upgrade the practice squad, and just trying to create an environment where competition is paramount. So I think those are probably the three things that you want to establish when coming in.
Well, sign me up, first of all. I'm a fan of this team already. And second of all, the things that you mentioned, culture, leadership structure, starting with the head coach down to the assistants, and the type of players that you're scouting and that you're bringing in. I appreciate the way that you've presented it, because if you think about it, all of those things have to be so connected to each other. You mentioned earlier in our conversation, no silos, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And when you're building in this way, where you're creating like an environment, less so different departments, how do you, in your role, because one of your main roles is to build bridges between all of these places, to know everything that's going on, to be able to make clear decisions or assist in making clear decisions, to understand the people of the building as much as you're understanding the process of the building, right? So how do you, in your personal journey, like how do you go about connecting or reaching into other parts of the building in order to create that environment that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think you have to try to just force collaboration, force communication on every level. And like I said, in particular between, coaching and personnel, we're not going to be in all the meetings with the coaches, but I'd like to, talk to the coaches and talk about how the players are performing in those meetings. How is this guy taking notes? How's he watching film? Is he, does he communicate well? Does he learn well? Like what are the things that he needs to work on? What's his attitude like? All those things. I mean, you have to try to bridge the gap, and you have to try to connect those dots. And likewise with coaching, when we get into those draft meetings, they're asking a lot of questions as well. They're asking the scouts, what's this kid's background? What makes him tick? How is he motivated? How does he learn? And I think those types of questions constantly have to be asked in order to come up with a great developmental plan for each player that's on our roster. So I think that it's really important. I think there's no quick fix to any of it, but it all comes through just constant communication about everything and everyone in the building, and trying to develop the players, but also trying to develop us as people that work in football ops, trying to develop coaches, you're trying to develop scouts, and come up with the best plan for everyone to improve, and ultimately just to improve the team as a whole.
I like that you included the scouts in development too. I think when people think of scouts, they think of like the grizzled guy living out of his car somewhere in Alabama, right? Scouting between Auburn and Alabama on that long highway, right?
Yeah.
Probably flew into Atlanta in the process, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's true too.
Yes, yeah, that's
Yeah,
true too. But
definitely.
but still,
Absolutely.
like I think that I like what you said about because they're like in little satellite worlds all around the country, and part of managing the talent identification process is communicating despite the fact that their job is very much remote for a lot of the year. And they
Right.
are finger on the pulse of these buildings. And I know from your own experience and then also what you're doing now in managing a lot of these people, what was the biggest, most important thing in terms of your development of like, I'm learning how to identify talent to I identify talent. And then how do you sort of apply that now to bringing together a collective of people that are all in different places at once?
That's a good question. I think, and obviously in starting out, 27 years ago, yeah, you're learning how to identify talent. You're looking for what traits each coach specifically wants for their position. And, again, it's through communication. So you're talking to the coach, hey, what are you talking to the linebacker coach, hey, what are you looking for in terms of the linebacker reading his run fits? What are you looking for in terms of what keys are they looking for? And I think you have those discussions, and we do a great job, I think, and it's happened throughout my career at the various different spots. We do a great job of during the times that the coaches and scouts are together, like training camp and mini camp, and whenever scouts are in the building, forcing collaboration, forcing conversations, forcing discussions. And so I think that through that, we get to kind of learn each other's world, and I have a great appreciation and a great respect for scouts because I did that for years. And yeah, I think that's the only way that you're going to grow and develop as someone in personnel and in football ops in general is just really through a lot of communication. And that's what we do. That's what we preach. And that's kind of how we operate. That's and once you're in it for a long time and you feel like you've been through a lot of different scenarios and you've seen a lot of different situations, that helps you from a management perspective as well. Because you can talk to the scouts and hey, what did you see here and offer suggestions but you always want to kind of let the scouts give their own opinion and give their own assessment of the player. You don't want to, try to, force or influence, the scouts to see things your way, but you also want to kind of open their eyes at times to, different, things that are going on. So I think it's really important to, have those discussions. You can never communicate enough about players. I think it's really important to talk about each player individually, and talk about, different scenarios and try to, cast a wide net when it comes to discussing players for the draft or for free agency or any part of like the onboarding process.
Yeah, that's a tough line to walk. You have to be open-minded as possible while still being incredibly decisive
Right.
in crunch time. And that takes time too. Chad, you're at the top of your game here. You're at the top of your field. Your team is about to, I hope, knock on wood here, make a real playoff push here and down the stretch run. What still makes you curious about football? Like, what still kind of makes you excited about not just the sport, but the process of it?
Everything, I love the process and love football and have since I was a little kid,
Mm-hmm.
when I first fell in love with the game, and it's ever evolving, and it's kind of like the more things change, the more things stay the same, like I said, I think I've seen a lot of different scenarios involving the game, but at the same time, there's always new strategies, new techniques to explore. And so I'm always interested in anything that's cutting edge in analytics
Mm-hmm.
or coaching or scouting. I just have a passion to learn. I think I've always had that passion, and for me, it doesn't feel like work. It really we have too much fun. Like we really have a great time. But we have a great time, and we're not going to let anybody outwork us. And I think that's a major part of why we've had success here, and hopefully why we're going to continue to have success.
Awesome. You are listening to Chad Alexander, the Assistant General Manager of the Los Angeles Chargers. Chad, awesome stuff. Thank you so much for joining me today on NFL Daily Power Players.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jordan.
That, of course, was Chargers Assistant General Manager Chad Alexander. We thank him for his time. I could have talked to him all day because what they're building over there, this combination of sort of vintage, like old school ideas and traits and toughness, and then this really modern way of blending analytics and coaching, and certainly some cutting edge coaching, especially on the defensive side of the ball with what Jesse Minter is doing. And under Jim Harbaugh, how all of those departments and all of those variables have to interconnect together. And Chad obviously has a huge role in that. Thanks for listening to NFL Daily Power Players. We are thrilled that you all seem to be liking these episodes so far. And thanks again to Chad Alexander and the Los Angeles Chargers.